In the last 60 years, the annual rate of increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide has grown 100 times faster than any previous natural increase in all of Earth's history. Because of this, scientists predict that the rate of global warming for the next century is at least 20 times faster than what we would consider normal. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Preview of Tomorrow. I am your host, Mike Lake, President and CEO of Leading Cities. In this preview, we will be reaching beyond basic talk about the threat of carbon emissions as I speak with Madison Savilow about how this threat can be addressed and how Carbon Upcycling Technologies is working to reverse the trends of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere.
Innovation, resiliency, discovery. Join Mike Lake, President and CEO of Leading Cities, as we explore the technologies shaping the possibilities of our future with a preview of tomorrow.
Welcome, Madison, and thank you so much for joining us. For our listeners, Madison Savilow is the Chief of Staff at Carbon Upcycling Technologies, a young but rapidly expanding company based out of Calgary, Canada. Now, before we get into what carbon upcycling does, Madison, I'd love you to start off this interview by telling us what do you believe is the biggest fear you have that faces society over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, no, thank you, Michael, for having me on. I think one of our biggest fears, especially at carbon upcycling, as well as my own personal fears, are environmental degradation, climate change, growing CO2 levels. I think there's a lot of implications that come from that and a lot of impact on people throughout the world, whether they're in big cities here in North America, smaller cities, rural areas. I think it plays a role in all facets of life.
There's no doubt about it. And you know, all our listeners, we hear so much about our carbon emissions and you know, the efforts like the Paris Agreement, of course, that countries around the world coming together. I think it's about 196 countries have now signed on to combat this challenge. So can you tell us a little bit more? What is this challenge really? Where does it come from? What do we do to stop it?
Yeah, really good question. I think, a lot of people understand this problem or they've heard of climate change, but maybe they don't understand the full scope of it. One analogy that we like to use is that if you were to take the weight of humanity, so every person on Earth, and multiply that by 100 times, that's the amount of CO2 that's entering the atmosphere every year. So it's crazy amount, but 40% of that.
You mean when you say the weight of humanity, you're talking about the collective, when every person on the planet stands on the scale.
Yes.
How much we all weigh.
Yes, and then multiply that by 100 times.
Wow.
Crazy. Yeah, so 40% of that comes from buildings or the built environment. So when you're talking about, big cities, that's a massive amount of CO2 emissions coming from the structures that are within those areas. And by 2060, we're going to see the built environment double in size. So there's a lot of new developments in the world, and that's why it's really important for us to go about this development in a really sustainable and resilient way.
You talked about buildings and the fact that cities are such a huge contributor. As I recall, cities contribute about 70% of the world's carbon emissions each year. Is that right?
That's probably pretty close. I know 40% comes from the buildings themselves, but the way that the cities operate and, just people in general gathering to these regions, I can easily see that being a valuable statistic.
And carbon itself is kind of a building block of just about everything, right? Including us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest, opportunities for us is to be able to use that as a resource rather than viewing it as a liability. So being able to harvest the carbon from the CO2 and use that for many different products. We're seeing it done across in crazy different industries, from vodka to crayons are even made of this to, concrete, which I'll talk a little bit about later.
That's amazing to me. I mean, to think of it in those terms, it would almost be if we were emitting gold into the atmosphere and just losing it, right? I mean, it can be such a valuable resource rather than a problematic resource.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe even more so, because I guess carbon would be very functional in the sense that it can be versatile and used in many different resources rather than gold that has some limitations on it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So that brings us to carbon upcycling. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you guys are doing. I find this to be so exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, we're pretty excited about it too, but we're a carbon utilization company. So we're taking the CO2 and using it in many different end products that add value to performance, to strength, to a lot of different metrics, depending on what that industry is. Our slogan, or what we're trying to do, is take the pollution of today to build tomorrow. So that's really our end mission, is to see that CO2 is used as a resource in every facet of life.
And can you give us some sense of what some of those products are that you are able to create?
Yeah, so a lot of our products are additives, actually. So we take gaseous CO2 from many different types of sources, whether that's a natural gas plant, we've used direct air capture CO2, and even industrial CO2. And we embed that into inorganic solid powders. So essentially, the particles of the powder are acting as a sponge. They suck up the CO2, and then we use those powders as additives for things like concrete, plastics, pharmaceuticals, solar panels. We've even launched a consumer product line. So it's very, very broad, but that allows us to tackle a lot of these bigger issues.
And consumer products, meaning that anybody listening today could actually be buying something that is has contributed to reducing the emissions in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the whole goal of this, was to show that this material can be used in pretty much anything. So we got really creative and we came up with a few products we thought were unique. They include things like yoga mats. We've got concrete pens. We have watches with concrete faces that have CO2 embedded in them. And then we've actually engaged with an artist in residence. So we have an amazing artist that we've worked with out of California. Her name is Annalie Levin, and she's created crayons. She's come up with T-shirts. It's been amazing to see what we can create with this.
Wow. So, for anybody who's out there birthday gift shopping, some great ideas. So I'm trying to wrap my head a little bit around scale on all of this. I mean, there's a lot, as you said, a lot of carbon being emitted into the atmosphere every year. So help me to understand first, what is it that you actually do? You kind of talked about, the powder absorbing this, but how does it all work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We have what we call the reactor. That's where all of our technology takes place and where this process happens. But essentially what we're doing is we're loading this powder into this large vessel, we're pressurizing it with CO2, and we're rotating the vessel for anywhere from a couple hours to a week. And that allows us to process this powder and then offload it into many different industries. One of the biggest industries we play in is the concrete industry. It's a major contributor to climate change, and that allows us to really access this very large market. Concrete is actually the second most used substance in the world other than water. So anything that you see made from concrete has a big carbon footprint, and we're reducing that CO2 value that's in that.
And by reducing it with these additives, are you not only reducing carbon, but are you adding to the strength of the final product, the concrete itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of our products have some sort of performance value. That's really how we're entering these industries and how we're able to deploy our technology, is to show that we have a performance value other than just, this green factor, so to speak. So with the concrete, that's our, I think, most exceptional example of how this works. But in addition to the CO2 adsorbed into the fly ash or natural pozzolan or recycled glass, all of these are additives to concrete that we can use. We're able to also reduce the amount of cement use by up to 20% and increase the compressive strength of concrete by up to 40%.
So when you say reduce the amount of cement by 20%, if I'm in the construction business and I'm building something out of concrete, you're also talking about a 20% reduction in cost off the bat, at least of my concrete cost, because I use 20% less. Is that right?
Close to, yeah. So cement is the most expensive portion of concrete, but because we're adding this enhanced fly ash to replace the cement, it's not quite 20%, but it is between 6 and 10% cost savings.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a cost savings. It's helping reduce carbon emissions. It's strengthening the final product. This is a win-win-win.
It is. I think you should be our next spokesperson for this. This would be great.
Well, I mean, just understanding the impact that this can have, and of course, for the average consumer, just buying a yoga mat it can help contribute to this effort. So, coming back to the question of scale, what is other than concrete companies, what are some of the largest buyers or clients, I guess you could say, of carbon upcycling, either current or future? Who's going to be buying this?
Well, it is a lot of concrete manufacturers. That's what we're looking for right now. Like, we just announced a partnership with CEMEX, which is a really large concrete manufacturer. We've been through the Lafarge Holcim Accelerator in France, and one of our local partners, Burnco, is just down the road from us, so it's really easy to send them product. But we are looking for licensing agreements as well. So whether that's the concrete side, plastics, whatever it may be, we're also able to license out the tech as well as the reactor itself. So that's something that we're looking to do, to deploy this widely and to make sure that we're able to deploy this and the technology is being used on a massive scale.
Got it. So real quick, tell us, how did all of this come to be? What was the impetus for carbon upcycling?
Yeah, it was before I started with the company, but in 2014, there was 3 founders of the company. 2 of them were leading a piping company here in Alberta, and the third worked with them. Apoorv Sinha is now our CEO of the company, and the other 2 original founders are our directors. But they started this really with a goal of creating an anti-corrosion coating made from CO2. So they knew that obviously CO2 is in abundance in the atmosphere, and we can use that as a resource. Like I mentioned a couple of times, that has been really the idea behind this whole thing, the entire duration of the company. So that was our very first product, actually, was the anti-corrosion coating, and we sold that first in 2017. But that's how it started, and we've branched out from there.
Well, in quite a tree you've built here of branches, from anti-corrosion coating to yoga mats. I love it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the future a little bit, and let's get us 5, 10, whatever years down the road here, and tell me, what does deployment of carbon upcycling look like? Where do you see it? How many tons of carbon do you see being pulled from the atmosphere each year?
Oh man, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where we go from there. I think each of the product lines itself will have their own type of runway and their own projection into the 5 and 10 year goals. I think obviously the biggest is going to be concrete, just because it's such a massive industry itself. But in that, we're looking to deploy our technology even further. So just to give you a bit of an idea, we've just commissioned a reactor that produces between 8 and 20 tons of concrete additive per day, which means that in the past 6 years, we've scaled our technology over 10 million times. So we're looking to increase that even more. Our next reactors we're looking for about 50 tons per day to 100 tons per day, and those will be directly at concrete manufacturer sites. So there would be very little transportation of this. They would have the capability to do this process themselves, which makes it very efficient. But that's kind of the model we're looking for most of these product lines, similar to the plastics, which would be, graphitic nanoplatelet. That's what they'd be producing. Right on their site, which is really exciting for us.
So to put this into terms that I can understand, in terms of my own impact and how much carbon, obviously this varies from country to country, but globally in average, do you have a sense of how much carbon an individual contributes each year?
That's a really good question. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I used to know these very well. And they're all on our website, actually. So we started offering this portion of an e-commerce site where you can offset any activity, including yourself, for a year. So there's some really cool opportunities within this space and within carbon utilization to do that and offer carbon credits for people and offset what your emissions are. We also have other things on there like your Thanksgiving dinner. You can offset that, or what it takes to own a cell phone for a year. All of these things that you do and all of these activities have emissions associated with them, and that's how we're able to translate it, is through that carbon credit value.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, speaking of that, can you share the contact information if people want to learn more or look into the website to calculate their offsets?
Yeah, for sure. You can find us at carbonupcycling.com. We have everything there on the website. I think our best email address is info@carbonupcycling.com. But yeah, we're on LinkedIn. We're on basically every platform of social media except for TikTok, but we're on everything. And you can also find me directly as well on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, Madison, I can't thank you and the whole team at Carbon Upcycling enough for the work that you're doing. Look, leading cities, we work with cities around the world. 90% of the world's cities are coastal. And so the work you're doing is literally preventing cities from being sacrificed to sea level rise. The impact that you're having is immense. I can't thank you enough for that effort. And I can't thank you enough for joining us today on Preview of Tomorrow, sharing this exciting technology with all of our listeners and viewers. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for having me on and for all your support.
Absolutely. Well, on to a less carbon future. How's that?
I agree. Yeah, let's do that.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Preview of Tomorrow. In addition to thanking our guest, I want to thank Peter Roy and Demetria Bridges for making this podcast possible. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and encourage others to also join us each week in previewing the possibilities of tomorrow.
Preview of Tomorrow is brought to you by Leading Cities, a global nonprofit driving resilience and sustainability for all by unleashing the potential of the world's cities. Join them at leadingcities.org.